population are missing the critical learning experiences needed for higher order thinking, executive function, and language skills. And now, Mr. President, on behalf of myself and Lisa, the teaching staff, and the children, we are so honored to have you at Capital Child Development Center.
Thank you. As my colleagues have heard me say in a different venue, my mother heard me say, "You're doing God's work," and you really are. You know, I know that a lot of people are in desperate need of a facility like this and child care. I didn't fully appreciate it as a young member of the county council when I was 27 years old. But when I got elected to the United States Senate, and I was 29, I wasn't old enough to be sworn in yet. Between the time I got elected and the time I actually ultimately went to the Congress, I turned the eligible age of 30. But also in the meantime, there was an automobile accident. My wife was Christmas shopping, and my daughter was killed. My wife was killed. And my two young boys, Bo and Hunter, were very badly injured and hospitalized for a long time. And so I thought, well, I'll get some help. And I was making a decent salary as a U.S. Senator, $42,000 a year. That was a decent salary. And I could not afford the child care. Everybody wonders why I commuted every day 265 miles a day to be back and forth with my children. I could afford the train, it was cheaper to be able to take every day so I could kiss my boys. It wasn't Ozzie and Harriet, but we'd have breakfast in the morning, and when they got a little older, get them off to school. And I'd get in the train and come home in time to, if I got home in time to have dinner, it was seldom I'd get home in time to have my dinner, and they'd save their dessert, and I got to see them, kiss them goodnight, and get in bed with them. And so it made me realize how difficult it is for the vast majority of people who need help. I was lucky. I had a mother who's nearby. A sister's my best friend who quit her job temporarily and moved in with her husband to help me raise my kids. But most people don't have that option. So I've been conscious of the concern and the lack of access and the lack of financial ability to have child care for a long time. And I want to thank the team here at the Capital Development Center for welcoming us today. And I want to thank the excellent Connecticut leaders you have here. Ned, you're one of the best governors in the United States of America. No, you really are. You really are, because you stand up for what you believe in and you don't back down. And Mr. Mayor, Luke is an Afghan war veteran. We were talking about all the work he's done with the former governor of Delaware, Jack Markell, now who's placing Afghan refugees coming out of Afghanistan. And we're continuing to get people out. Thank you for what you do. I really mean it. And Richard Blumenthal, who was back in those days the Attorney General when my son Bo was still alive, and he was Attorney General. And not a joke, but he looked to Richard for help. And thanks for the way you took him under your wing. I really mean it, Richard. It made a difference. You know what he thought of you. And Chris Murphy, who has been not only a real soldier, but he has stood up and stuck up for me. And Chris, you know, it matters. It matters when things are tight, and you stand up and make the case, and I do appreciate it. And John Larson and I go back a long way. and Joe, you can't deny me. There's no way out. And Rosa DeLaura, who is, I don't have time, I want to keep you, but the first time I came up this way, my son was going to Yale Law School, and her mother was a committeeman? Alderwoman. And I was up on a ladder helping him paint the place he had just rented. And this knock on the door, and this lovely woman came and said, "Where's Biden? Where's Joe Biden?" And I was up on a ladder, and I had paint all over me, and I was a sitting U.S. Senator, and I said, I'm here. She said, no, where's Biden? Where's Biden? And she brought the chief of police over to let him know that everything was going to be taken care of. But your mother was something else. But that old expression, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Rosie, you've been an incredible leader in all things having to do with the health and well-being of children and women. And we would not have had the legislation we're now trying to continue were it not for you. And Jim, you're the real deal. As well as Johanna. The comment I got from Johanna, I get from everybody. Where's Jill? Where's Jill? I'm Jill Biden's husband. She is now I think she's either in New Jersey or Virginia, I'm not sure, after teaching 15 credits this week at the community college, and she is out there making the case. I'm here today to talk about what's fundamentally at stake right now, in my view, for the families, not only of Connecticut, because you're ahead of the curve in some of what you've done on your own, but for our country. For a long time, America set the pace across the globe. For most of the 21st century, we literally led the world by a significant margin in the investments we invested in our own people, Not only our roads, our highways, our bridges, but on our people and on our families. And we didn't just build the interstate highway system and invest to win the space race. We also were among the first to provide access to free education beginning back at the turn of the 20th century. It was a distinction and a decision to invest in our children and our families, and it's a major reason why we were able to lead the world in the 21st century. One of the few nations in the world had universal education for everyone, beginning for what was then first grade. But somehow along the way, we sort of stopped investing in our people. Our infrastructure has fallen from the best in the world. According to the World Economic Forum, our infrastructure ranks 13th in the world. Roads, bridges, highway, a whole range of things. But just as important as the Organization of Economic Opportunity and Cooperation now ranks America 35 out of 37 major countries when it comes to investing in early childhood education and care. Say another way, the world's catching up and beginning to pass us. Jill has, my community college, Dr. Biden has an expression she's used for real. Any country that educates us will outcompete us. Any country that out-educates us will outcompete us. We cannot be competitive in the 21st century in this global economy if we fail to invest. That's why I propose two critical pieces of legislation being debated in Washington right now. They're both bills. They're not about left versus right. They're not about moderate versus progressive or anything else that pits one American against another. These bills, in my view, are literally about competitiveness versus complacency, about opportunity versus decay, and about leading the world or continue to let the world move by us. Folks, a lot of folks know what's at stake in the infrastructure bill. It's about rebuilding the arteries of our economy, putting people to work in good-paying jobs. The estimates from Wall Street would create up to 16 million new jobs over time. Good-paying jobs, union jobs, not $5 an hour, $7, $15, but $40, $50 an hour, prevailing wage. You can raise a family on. You can live with some dignity and pride. Bringing our roads and bridges up to speed, replacing lead water pipes. There's over 40,000 schools across America where you got to be worried when you go to the water fountain, whether there's lead in the water and the children are being poisoned. You can turn on the faucet so that every place in America, but you assure the water is clean and able to be drunk. Laying transmission lines for a modern and resilient energy grid. Making high-speed internet affordable and available everywhere in America, from urban, suburban, rural. There's parts of the country that are just being left behind. And there are parts of the country in states that are economically prosperous that are being left behind. Meeting the moment on the climate crisis, and in the process creating millions of good-paying jobs. I've had a couple conferences already held. I'm going to COP26 in Scotland shortly. And what I had 71 heads of state on the first one I did in the White House. And I said, and people are starting to talk about it now, not about me, about the idea. When I think climate, I think jobs. good paying jobs, union jobs. This is an opportunity. We're the only country in the world that has consistently turned difficulty into opportunity. We have a chance to not only make this world more livable, but to actually create greater opportunity for people. Making landmark investments in public transit and rail, and increasing efficiency, reducing emissions. You know, there's millions of kids getting on diesel school buses, and inhaling air, getting asthma. They should be electric buses. Electric buses. That's going to happen. So look, I'm going to have a tendency to say more than I need to say because you all understand it. But the bottom line is I wanted to come here today because too many folks in Washington still don't realize it isn't enough just to invest in our physical infrastructure. We also have to invest in our people. And that's what the second bill does, the Build Back Better initiative. Seeing children and educators here at this center is a perfect reminder of what our families need and our economy needs so badly to be able to thrive. You know, you all know the statistics, particularly the teachers here. A child coming out of a single-parent house where there's real difficulty will hear literally 1 million fewer words spoken, not different words, spoken, than the child coming out of a middle-class household. And so no matter what you say, you start them at the same age, at age 6 or 7, 5 or 6 in school, they're already behind the curve, How can we compete in a world of millions of Americans' parents, especially moms, can't be part of the workforce because they can't afford the cost of child care or elder care, I might add. Elder care. They're the sandwich generation getting crushed. Here in Connecticut, the average annual cost to bring your toddler to a quality child care center is about $16,000 a year. That's what it is around the country. Some places more, some places a little less. A lot of money. It's $16,000 after taxes, after you pay your taxes. So the average two-parent family with 2 young kids spends 26% of their income on child care every year. My Build Back Better plan is going to change that. It's going to cut the cost of child care for most Connecticut families literally in half. No middle-class family will pay more than 7% of their income on child care. None, period. And that's going to help parents get back into the workforce and make ends meet. Or maybe care for that. We have to do the same. I'm not going to talk about it today, but the other piece of it you all know, it deals with elder care. You got 80,000 people waiting to qualify under Medicaid, and there's no spaces. We can afford to do this. But at any rate, we also have to provide businesses with tax credits to build on-site care facilities. Look, you in the legislature were way ahead of the curve. You decided that for people working in the legislature, there should be a place for their children. Well, you know, what we want to do is make sure that we encourage businesses to do the same, to get a significant tax cut, to be able, if they have an on-site facility, to take care of their workers' children when they show up. So you go to work with your child, and you have a serious facility on site. Well, studies show that when you have on-site care for a children's center, businesses, the business itself, have less employee turnover, less absenteeism, and higher productivity. We can show you all those studies. It's real. We can't afford to lag behind other countries when they're investing. When America made 12 years of public education universal more than a century ago, it gave the best educated, best prepared workforce in the world to the rest of the world. But if we're designing public education today, all of a sudden we had none, we said, okay, what are we going to do? We need free public education. Does anybody think we'd think 12 years was enough in the second quarter of the 21st century? The fact is today only about half of 3- and 4-year-olds in America are enrolled in early education, childhood education like you're doing here. In Germany, France, and the UK, even Latvia, the number of children in those countries enrolled is 90%. 90%. My plan gets us back on track. Provides 2 years of high-quality preschool for every child in America. It also makes investments in higher education by increasing Pell Grants. I don't know whether I can get it done, but I also have proposed this free community college, like you've done here in the state of Connecticut, to help students from lower income families attend community college and 4-year schools. It invests in historically black colleges, universities to make sure young people from every neighborhood have a shot at good paying jobs in the future. We also extend this lady's child tax credit, which is finally a tax cut for the middle class. Now look, my friends on the other side never had any problem providing $2 trillion in tax cuts for the very wealthy. Look, I don't think you shouldn't be able to make $1 million or $1 billion. I'm a capitalist, but guess what? I'm also listed for 36 years as the poorest man in the Congress. But I make big money now. I'm a president. But all kidding aside, I don't think we should punish anybody, but just pay your fair share. Just pay your fair share. You know, the issue that has been championed by Rosa for years, in the past, if you paid your taxes and had an income high enough that you were able to take the $2,000 per child deduction, you could actually write it off your taxes. But how many families do you know of cops and firefighters and school teachers and like that don't pay that much in tax because they pay tax, but there's nothing, you say you're going to get $4,000 back for your kids. Well, you know, it's not refundable. It either comes off your tax bill or you don't get it at all. The American Rescue Plan, which these folks voted for as well, and I'm very proud of, is a real game changer. It started our economy moving again. Recognize that people with lower incomes don't get the benefit of that tax break because they don't have that much to deduct. So we make it refundable, make it permanently refundable. So you get that back over the years. You get, if you only had $1,000 in taxes and you had 3 kids, you'd end up in a situation where you get $5,000 refundable to you. They would pay you. The government would pay you. And we increased that amount in the near term to $3,600 for every child under the age of 6 and $3,000 for dependents between the ages of 6 and 17. The money is already a game changer for working families. It's projected to cut child poverty in Connecticut, well, one of the wealthier states like Delaware, in Connecticut, by 40%. If we don't pass the bill, I mean, it's real. It's a life changer. The Build Back Better Act says that you get the first half of it paid to you, and then the second half you get paid on a monthly basis. People are getting, hard-working families are getting a check in the mail on the 15th. Today's the 15th, isn't it? Or their bank account, just like you get your Social Security check. But it's for your children. It's for being able to raise your kids. That monthly tax cut for parents is going to end in just a couple months. It's going to impact families of 61 million kids right at the holidays when the winter heating costs are going up, when we need to keep the taxes for families going down. The bottom line is this: when you give working families a break, we're not just raising their quality of life, we're positioning our country to compete in the future. You know, when I talk to all your folks out in the playground, as I joked, and said, everybody knows I like kids better than people. Fortunately, they're like me. That's why maybe I like them. But all kidding aside, you all talked about what it means to the families of these children. And granted, you had to cut way back, and because of a lot of things happening, things aren't the same as they were. But these bills are about strengthening the economy for decades to come. Both of these bills spend out over 10 years. Take the infrastructure bill. All those investments in roads, bridges, highways, high-speed internet, water, clean water, everything that represent less than 0.5% of our economy each year if you add it all up over these years. And the cost of the Build Back Better bill in terms of adding to the deficit is zero. So when I hear people say it costs $3.5 trillion, and be honest with you, we're probably not going to get $3.5 trillion this year. We're going to get something less than that. But I'm going to negotiate it. I'm going to get it done with the grace of God and the goodwill of neighbors and the creek not rise, as my grandpa would say. But all kidding aside, we're going to keep coming. And because the more we demonstrate it works, the more we can do. It's paid for because big corporations and the very wealthy ought to start paying their fair share. Let me be clear. Nobody, since I got elected, and when I was campaigning, nobody who makes under $400,000 a year, which is a lot of money, will see their taxes go up one single penny. Nobody. Not one. That's why in the highway bill, I didn't add gas tax. So I keep that commitment. In fact, this plan cuts taxes for working people. There's no reason why, as I said, billionaires should pay a lower tax rate, literally a lower tax rate, than a school teacher and a firefighter, a couple. So that's what's happening now. It isn't right that 55 of our Fortune 400 companies, the largest companies in America, last year, 55 of the Fortune 500 paid zero in taxes, and they made $40 billion in profit. I'm glad they made a profit. Keep people employed. I mean that sincerely. But pay your fair share. Just pay a decent portion of what we lay out in this piece of legislation. And by the way, I've had a number of Fortune 500 companies come to me and say, you're right, we can pay a higher tax than we're paying now. Because they understand the impact if we don't invest like we have to on their long-term health and well-being. This needs to change. Working folks understand it. That's why, despite the attacks and misinformation, my plan still has the overwhelming support of the American people when they're told what's in it. They understand that when families have a little more breathing room, America has a lot better shot. My dad used to say, for real, my dad was a well-read, well-bred man who was regretted his whole life he never got a chance to go to college. And he worked like heck. He'd always come home for dinner and then go back to work. And I remember we lived in a four-bedroom split-level home with 4 kids and a grandpa. And you know, my bed was against the wall where my parents' bed was against the adjacent wall. I remember one night, I could tell my dad was just so restless. I was in high school. The next morning I asked my mom, I said, what's the matter with Dad, Mom? She said, well, honey, his company just told him they were going to do away with health insurance. No health insurance. Well, you know what? My dad's not, we weren't poor. My dad made probably on average in those days $22,000, $25,000 a year, which is a decent salary. But he used to say, everybody's entitled to just a little bit of breathing room. Just a little bit. A little bit of breathing room. You know, they know this is about dignity and respect. It's about building this economy from the bottom up and the middle out. I've never seen a time, and some of you may have, beyond my colleagues in the Congress, the press may have your master's or doctorate degrees in economics. Name me a single time in American history when the middle class was doing well that the wealthy didn't do very, very well. Name me a time. One single time in American history. So we're not hurting anybody. We're just making sure everybody gets a shot. Let me close with this. And this is not hyperbole. The world is watching. Autocrats believe that the world is moving so rapidly that democracies cannot generate consensus quickly enough to get things done. Not a joke. I've had hours and hours and hours of meetings and personal conversations with Xi Jinping. I spent more time with him, I believe, than any other world leader has when I was vice president and now on the phone. Every time he calls or we talk on this, it's a conversation between an hour and a half and 2.5 hours. Not a joke, my word. But he doesn't think democracies can compete because they can't react quickly enough. In my summit with Putin in Switzerland, they're betting democracies can't compete. We can't move quickly enough. I'm heading to the G20. Came back from the G7. You know how they measure? They don't measure us based on the size of our military. They don't measure us on how much power we have that way. They want to know, can we get anything done? Not a joke. And many of you travel internationally. Can we get anything done? Can you put anything together to get something done in America? So folks, they're betting that we won't respond to this inflection point in history. But I've always said, and I mean, some of you guys who work with me know this, I've said it 1,000 times, it's never a good bet to bet against the American people. Never a good bet. So it's time for us to invest in ourselves show the world that American democracy works. We've always led the world not by the example of our physical power, but by the power of our example. That's why the world has followed. And given us that half a chance, there's not a single solitary thing that we can't achieve if we do it together. So I'm hopeful. There's a lot of questions the press is going to want to ask me, I know, about how are the negotiations going and how we're going to get this done and so on. Well, I told you before what my neurosurgeon years ago said when I had that aneurysm. He said, your problem, and I was then a senator, your problem, Senator, is you're a congenital optimist. But I'm convinced we're going to get this done. I'm convinced we're going to get it done. We're not going to get $3.5 trillion. We'll get less than that, but we're going to get it. And we're going to come back and get the rest. So I want to thank you all, and God bless you. And I know you're asking about President Clinton. I've been exchanging calls. He seems to be, God willing, doing well. And so when I talk to him, I'll let you all know. But in the meantime, thank you for taking the time to be here. And I say this again, the press heard me say it, for all you elected officials, it's like a busman's holiday for you. Come to have to listen to another politician speak. But I am really, and I mean this without exception, I'm so proud to be associated with each one of you. You're honorable, decent, smart women and men, and there's a lot we can get done. So thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. I guess I'm seeing you.
You guys got
Great seeing you. See you next time, Rob. Meet you. Home safe.
my family who are here, but particularly my wife Jackie and my daughter Christina were here today as well. And I'll mention my niece Helena Folks, who is the chairing of our advisory board, of which we have any number of members here today as well who served on that. But I'm very grateful to them, obviously, over the years for their tremendous support as well, for what they've contributed along the way. I've had a wonderful board helping us out over the last year or so. I mentioned the governor, his help, and others. But Alan Lazowski and Richard Friedman are two great friends, have been a tremendous help. I'm deeply grateful to them for their work and their help in putting this together. And of course, what an honor it's been to have Rabbi Lazowski and his lovely wife Ruth invoke the invocation here today for all of us. I wanted this to happen for many reasons. Rabbi, you're an inspiration in so many ways. You and your lovely wife were survivors of that Holocaust, which was the genesis of my father's coming alive, if you will, at the Nuremberg trials. And so it would have been not quite the same event had you not been here to start this ceremony off, because so much of what you and the other survivors have done over the years have made the issue of human rights come directly home to all of us. Thank you for your contributions to our state on countless occasions, and thank you for reminding all of us to never, ever forget. So thank you, my dear friend Rabbi, for being here and being a part of this day as well. On any journey in life, you meet wonderful people, and there are an awful lot of them gathered here as I look around who are gathered here today. But one of the people that I knew about, I'd heard his name, but didn't get to actually spend time with him until we decided to have lunch with each other about a year and a half ago. And so Gary Gladstein and Phyllis, thank you both. Everything you've done for UConn already, a UConn grad, giving back to this university. The great Human Rights Institute, which is, of course, something that all of us are so deeply proud of, would never have happened without you. And so thank you immensely, my friend, for your loyalty to this university, your generosity to this university, and your commitment to human rights. It means a great deal. Thank you very much, Gary, for all of that as well. You know, I've always said in politics, the people that you mention at an event like this never remember that you've mentioned them. The people that you forget never forget that you've left them out as well. So it's a very dangerous process to go through. But I know gathered here with us today, I've met, in fact, saw them coming through the door, are my former colleagues and members of our Connecticut delegation in Congress. And I see Dick Blumenthal over on the side. I saw Chris Murphy coming in. I saw Johanna Hayes, John Larson, of course, you've heard from Rosa, Jim Himes as well. And right in the congressional district of Joe Courtney. I think I got them all. If I left someone out, tell me. But I thank you all for being here and being a part of this day, and our legislative leaders in the General Assembly and the members, rank and file members are here as part of that as well. And I know there are a lot of you here in this room. There have been some 200 or 300 people that I call part of my family in a way over the last, or during the 36 years that I served in public office representing the state, first as a congressman and then as a senator, as Rosa mentioned. And I've been blessed by having remarkable people who are a part of those efforts over all those long years. They call themselves the Dodd Squad, coming along. A creative name, I might add. I don't know where they got that title from. But I'm grateful to them so much for everything they did to make our work successful. And there are no words I can ever use to thank the people of this state for giving both my father and I the honor to represent Connecticut in the halls of Congress. Together it was 52 years, his service and mine, to represent the state in that building. And so I'm very grateful to my staff. And I'd be remiss if I didn't at this particular moment. I remember I hired a guy out of a friendly ice cream shop almost more than 40 years ago to come and be a part of the staff. And if just a couple of days ago, after a long illness, Eddie Mann, my chief of staff at the Senate office, passed away. And so I want Eddie to know, even though he's not here today, how much he's responsible for everything else that happened over the years to make us successful on behalf of the people of this state. So to my staff, I thank all of them as well, the Dodd Squad. The Dan Wiener, I should have mentioned at the top. Glenn Matoma, who's been the director of the Dodd Impact Program. Glenn, thank you for everything you've done as well. And Kathy. And Kathy Leibel at the director of HRI, the Human Rights Institute. Again, it's a great team you put together making this happen. Richard Wilson, who is the Gladstein, holds the Gladstein chair, is also tremendously important. And Richard, thank you for all that you do as well in this. And lastly, events like this don't happen miraculously. You have people who dedicate themselves working with the university, the governor's office, the board of trustees. But I want Lee Reynolds, who's done a tremendous job for over a year pulling this all together. And Erin Bingle. Erin Bingle as well, working with us. Erin and I have only known her a short time, but she is phenomenal, the job she's done as well. So Erin, thank you for everything you've done to pull this all together for us. Well, let me just, in my sort of brief remarks here, because this is a great honor to have the President of the United States on our campus here and in our state. 75 years ago, on October 15th, 1946, that's tomorrow, 21 defendants at the Nuremberg trial were waiting in their cells 75 years ago today, on the eve of receiving the sentences that the four Allied nations, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, had concluded only 2 weeks earlier on October 1st. Winston Churchill had argued for summary executions of all the defendants at Nuremberg. Joseph Stalin suggested a show trial for a day or two or a week or two, and then execute all of the defendants at Nuremberg. 10 of the defendants on October 16th, 1946, senior Nazi leaders, would be executed the next day on October 16th. 8 of the defendants were given a wide range of prison sentences, and 3 of the defendants were completely acquitted on that day. Who would have ever imagined, if you will, that a trial conducted by 4 nations with highly diverse judicial systems could adhere to the principles of the rule of law as they prosecuted some of the worst, most vile, horrific criminals in recorded history? 1 year earlier, in November of 1945, the chief prosecutor for the United States Supreme Court Justice, Robert Jackson, eloquently foretold why the trials at Nuremberg were so critical. His words, uttered 3/4 of a century ago, predicted the conduct of the trial and, importantly, the relevancy of Nuremberg in our 21st century world. My father revered Justice Jackson, almost a father and son sort of relationship, and he often quoted a sentence from Justice Jackson's opening remarks at the trial. Let me share them with you. That 4 great nations, he said, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance by voluntarily submitting their captive enemies to the judgment of the rule of law, is one of the most significant tributes that power ever paid to reason. One sentence which captured the essence of Nuremberg, the rule of law. This wasn't about colonies and acquiring property. It was about restoring the rule of law that had been so violated. Everything the Nazis did during their reign was, in their minds, justified, ironically, because of the Nuremberg laws that gave them permission in their minds to do what they did. Prior to his death in April of 1945, Franklin Roosevelt, as many of you know, appointed Justice Jackson as the United States prosecutor at Nuremberg. And President Truman, shortly thereafter, of course, confirmed that choice. What FDR, Harry Truman, and Justice Jackson understood, and what my father, as a 38-year-old Justice Department prosecutor, would come to understand, and what President Joe Biden has believed and championed for his entire public life, is the peace and security we all seek at home and abroad is rooted in the triumph of democratic values and the rule of law. The confirmation of my father's conviction that the Nuremberg trials were of meaningful importance was expressed in a letter to my mother in the early summer of 1946, almost a year later after the trials began. The letter captures why Nuremberg resonates even today, in my view, with all who value the rule of law. And further, that letter explains the huge impact that Nuremberg had on my father and his deep commitment to human rights and the rule of law throughout his public life. Let me quote from that letter to my mother in June of 1946. "Someday," he wrote, "the Nuremberg trials will be recognized as a great landmark in the struggle of mankind for peace. I will never do anything as worthwhile again. Nothing will ever really be as important. Someday the children, I hope, will point to it and be proud and inspired by it. Perhaps they will be at the bar themselves, and perhaps they will invoke the precedents and call upon the law that we make here at Nuremberg." Today we gather on the campus of a great American university and at the entrance to its Center for Human Rights. May I say with thanks and confidence to those of you gathered here today who made this day possible, including, of course, my friend, the President of the United States. In response to my father's hope that he uttered 75 years ago, here at this center, at this university, in this our country, we will invoke the precedents and call upon the law that was made in Nuremberg 75 years ago. I am very grateful to my dear, dear friend, our President, for coming to Connecticut, for coming to our flagship university, and for coming to the Dodd Center for Human Rights. My friendship with Joe Biden goes back years as Senate colleagues, and it strongly continues to this day. A friendship that is both personally and substantively grounded. When my sister passed away some years ago in Rhode Island, who came to Rhode Island and walked unannounced into that funeral home? It was then the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden. When my older brother was diagnosed with cancer, who did I call first for advice and counsel on what to do? My friend, Joe Biden. And we were both campaigning for the presidential nomination, which you've all certainly forgotten, in 2007. Participating in those endless debates. Which candidate flew to and from the debate with me? My friend, Joe Biden. Now, allow me to quickly add, we did so because of our deep friendship for each other, but we were also both broke, I might add, as well. In today's highly polarized political world, such joint ventures, regrettably, would be unlikely. So I'm grateful to my friend for being with us today. But there are strong substantive reasons as well for our friendship. In all our years together, I know of no other Senate colleague with whom I served who cared more or fought harder for the fundamental human rights of people at home and around the globe. Before his public life, President Biden was personally engaged with the Civil Rights Movement in Wilmington, Delaware. He authored the Violence Against Women Act, and he was a leading voice against apartheid in South Africa. And his historic confrontation with the Balkans in the Balkans conflict, during the Balkans conflict, with the leading Serbian human rights abuser, Slobodan Milosevic, was yet another example of his fearless advocacy of human rights. The President was a consistent, strong voice on human rights conditions in Northern Ireland as well, and I never had a more loyal colleague in my efforts to stem the tide of human rights abuses in Central America. As Senator, as Vice President, and today as our President, Joe Biden is not merely an advocate of human rights and the rule of law. He is consistently and actively engaged as an outspoken world leader in this cause. Today, hate crimes and hate speech, as we all know, are on the rise. Supremacist groups are proliferating at home and around the globe as well. And the number of autocratic regimes seems to grow on a regular basis. Mr. President, your presence here today on this our university campus, at this Center for Human Rights, is not merely a gesture of friendship, as much as I appreciate our friendship. It is also a reflection of who you are, of what you believe, and what you want for our country. Your courageous decisions, your clear priorities, in my view, and your deep, long-held convictions to build America back better after these hard and difficult years is exactly the leadership that our country so desperately needs. My friends gathered here today on this campus, would you please join me in welcoming and thanking our President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden.
Thank you so very much. My name is Joe Biden. I am Jill Biden's husband. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you. Thank you. It is truly, it's not hyperbole to suggest It's a great honor to be here, a genuine honor. And at this great public university, celebrating the life and legacy of not one, but two proud sons of Connecticut, Senator Thomas Dodd and my good friend, and we truly are really good, close friends, Senator Chris Dodd. Chris and I have known each other for a long time. But if you'll excuse the point of personal privilege, as we used to say in the Senate, I saw up close how he fought for human rights and human dignity in the Senate. But you know my measure, Madam Ambassador, Ambassador Kennedy, you know what my measure is? People who tell me they care about people and then disrespect a waitress or a waiter. People who tell me they care about how, in fact, people are entitled to be treated with dignity and walk by someone at a shoe sign stand and suddenly say hello. People who do not do the just simply decent things for ordinary people. That's the real measure. I've never seen Chris, figuratively or speaking, walk by anybody. I've never seen him, nor his wife, nor his two brilliant, beautiful daughters. I remember the passion and eloquence that you brought to the floor, Chris, whether you were fighting for American families or serving as the Senate leading voice on engagement with Latin America and the Caribbean. And your brother, the ambassador, did a pretty damn good job as well. I think that the work this center is doing to bring human rights to the forefront of public understanding is making a real and immediate impact for all young people today. Well, you know, I think it's going to rate high among your family's many great and lasting contributions to the country, Chris. And I know this is truly a family commitment for the Dodds. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I think I really mean it. It's an honor to be able to be here. Of course, I owe Chris. I remember when, as he pointed out, we were both running for president back in 2007 with almost no cash in either of our campaigns. You let me hop a ride with you in a twin-engine prop plane, true story, from our Senate vote in D.C. to a Democratic debate in New Hampshire. We were on our way to the debate one other time, but the whole way up, we just laughed and told stories before we were debating one another. And then the next day, to get back to the Senate to vote, we had to flag down remember this? Flag down a young senator named Barack Obama to get to even open the airport. God's truth. Remember that, Chris? Here, he'd just been there 2 years. He was on my Foreign Relations Committee. I was chairman. I said, can you get the airport open for us? I used to kid Barack. I couldn't understand why he so soundly defeated me in that primary. And then I realized when he'd be introduced by the voice of God. I get introduced by Johnny Scanafrana. So it took a while for me to figure all this out. Luckily, Chris, I got to travel in a much nicer plane these days. And it's yours to travel in anytime you would like. I want to thank a few more proud Connecticut leaders who've been spending time with me today. Governor Lamont, you're one of the finest governors in the country. I'm not being solicitous. That's a fact. Exceeded only by your wife. And Senator Blumenthal, I mentioned earlier today, I apologize for repeating this, but my son, Beau Biden, who's the one that should be standing here talking to you, my son, Beau Biden, was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. And one of the people he went to and sought advice from, for real, was then Attorney General Blumenthal. They became friends, and my son was a great admirer, and I think the senator knows that. And Senator Murphy, if I have to summon in the foxhole with me, I want Murph with me, man. No, I'm serious. This guy knows as much about foreign policy as anybody does, and His failure to remain silent has meant a great deal to me because he's spoken up on so much. And Representative Courtney, I thank you for your help and your support. And Rosa DeLauro. Rosa, I don't owe as much as Chris does to Rosa, but I owe a hell of a lot to her. My son was married, and he was in the second year of law school, and he transferred to Yale Law School. And Rosa heard that I was coming up with him, and the apartment he rented was less than ideal. And the whole thing had to be painted. My brother Jimmy fixes everything. My brother Jimmy's with us, and we went down and bought about 28 gallons of paint. I don't know how, but for real, it was hot as hell as well. And I'm up on a 8-foot ladder painting the crown molding and sweating like of the proverbial you know what. And here at the door, I said, "Come in." And the then is it alderman or councilman at the time? Alderman Delora walked in, her mom, and she said, "Where's Biden?" I said, "I'm here." She said, "No, stop fooling with me, son. Where's Biden?" I said, "No, I'm Biden. I'm Biden." And she came over. She said, "I just want to come over and introduce myself and tell your son will be taken care of." And in walks the chief of police. I thought, holy God, what did I do? She said, "You have nothing to worry about. You have nothing to worry about." Talk about constituent service. Rosa, you come by it honestly. And Rosa, we've all, and I'm not being solicitous again, using that word twice now, we've all learned a great deal from you. I want to thank you for your long-standing dedication related to the well-being of children and families, and for championing and expanding the child tax credit, which is a gigantic middle-class tax cut for working families that finally got passed in the American Rescue Plan, which we were able to get done immediately upon being elected. And Rosa will not tell you, but she's the first person I called to ask for her help as to how I should do this. And that put money in the pockets of families all across this country, even as we speak. It's how we're going to cut child poverty in this country. And we've already cut it nearly in half. And none of us should lose sight of what it meant to American families when we think about our mission to defend human rights and dignity at home and around the world. 26 years ago today, another United States Senator, United States President, who I just spoke to, Chris, literally an hour and a half ago, Bill Clinton, and he sends his best, by the way, visited this university to dedicate the Thomas J. Dodd Research Center, a library and archives of papers that amount to an incredible first-person, first draft of history. And let me say, they're all thinking about President Clinton today as sending him his good wishes to speedy recovery. He's always been the comeback kid. He's getting out of the hospital. Everything's going well. But he wanted to send his best. As a young lawyer, Tom Dodd had already built a record of fighting hatred by prosecuting the KKK in the South. But when in 1945 he left behind his beloved Grace and his 5 young children, a young Christopher, just 14 months old at the time, to travel to the bombed-out cities of Europe to document the shocking atrocities still fresh in their horror, to question and cross-examine some of history's most notorious villains. That's not hyperbole. Some of history's most notorious villains. And to expose beyond question the depravity and the crimes against humanity that the Nazi regime committed. Tom Dodd dedicated his intellect and his moral passion and his resolute sense of right and wrong to making the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal a testament to justice. And that's what it was, a testament to justice. Nothing like it ever happened before. And all the while, he was writing letters to his Grace, lamenting their separation, but recognizing the momentous weight of history that rested on his shoulders. And Chris, I came up with the same sentence from your book. Someday, he wrote, will be recognized as a great landmark in the struggle of mankind for peace. Never before has such a record been written, and men will read it for 1,000 years in amazement and wonder how it ever happened. When President Clinton spoke at this first dedication, he ended on a poignant reminder. He said, and I quote, "The road to tyranny, we must never forget, begins with the destruction of truth." The road to tyranny begins with the destruction of truth. In my view, that was the lesson at the heart of the Nuremberg trials. Finding truth, documenting it, so it could never be denied. In court, Tom Dodd built a case fact by fact, using the Nazis' own meticulous records of crimes and shocking human evidence to pin down Nazi leaders who tried to deny their complicity and feign ignorance. And even more important, it denied the entire German policy the ability to feign ignorance. To deal with the past, you must face the truth. Whether it's Dachau, or Buchenwald, Auschwitz, or other camps, millions of Jews rounded up, along with members of other minority groups, thrown into camps, abused, used as forced labor, medical experimentation. 6 million Jews murdered, including so many who met their ultimate fate in the gas chamber. He made sure no one could deny their own eyes and what they saw. He preserved the truth, ugly and as traumatic as it was for all of history, so that the horrors of the Holocaust could never be diminished or denied, and the evil that we still have to guard against to this day has to be watched. Chris, as you heard me say many times before, because you got to meet my dad. My dad was a well-read, high school educated fellow whose greatest regret was he never went to college. But he cared deeply about human dignity. Our dinner table, my dad was what many would call a righteous Christian. He happened to be a Catholic, but he's a righteous Christian. And growing up, my dad would come home for dinner before we went back to close the business he managed. And the dinner table was a place we sat down to have conversation and incidentally eat. I'm serious. My dad used to talk about, as a student of the Holocaust, what a tragedy it was that we didn't bomb the railroad tracks toward the end of the war. How wrong it was that we turned away the St. Louis, a ship full of Jewish refugees from Europe. He believed passionately the only way we could make real the promise of never again was to keep reminding ourselves of what had happened and how so many people otherwise thought themselves decent people, rationalized that it really wasn't happening. We didn't know what was going on. Because they weren't turning on the gas valve, they had no responsibility. That's why, if you'll again excuse a point of personal privilege, when each of my children, and now my grandchildren, turn the age of 15, the first thing I've done, my word is abiding, is put them on an aircraft and fly to Dachau, one at a time, at age 15. Work sets you free as you go through the entrance. But that's not what I wanted them to see. I wanted them to see the lovely homes that were right up against the fence line with their beautiful roofs. People living in there rationalized that it's not me, I'm not doing this. And I don't know really what's going on in there. I want them to see the ability of the human mind to rationalize cannot be underestimated. I would say parenthetically, the reason why Germany has been able to turn it around unlike other countries is because they faced it head on, acknowledged. So let me say it again. Nuremberg was unlike anything that ever came before. It was not about vengeance. It was about accountability. For only acknowledging the truth can we prevent the repetition of atrocities, which are happening now in other parts of the world. It elevated our conception, as Chris said, of the rule of law. It set a marker for the future of justice, uplifted the importance of human rights in international affairs. We see it in the Nuremberg tribunals, the blueprint we see in those tribunals, the blueprint for future United Nations tribunals that would help deliver justice after atrocities committed in Rwanda, in the former Yugoslavia. We see it in the values championed at Nuremberg and the antecedents of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the foundation of a rules-based international order built out of the wreckage of 2 wars, world wars, not just to prevent us from destroying ourselves, but to actively build a better future. We see in the passion of a young prosecutor a commitment to prioritizing the human impacts of policies. The commitment carried through in his son's career, public service, by all the students of this institute who've been inspired by the example. We need you. We need you badly. And as we look around the world today, we see human rights and democratic principles increasingly under assault. We feel the same charge of history upon our own shoulders to act. We have fewer democracies in the world today than we did 15 years ago. Fewer, not more, fewer. Cannot be sustained. That's why from day one of my administration, I've taken concrete steps to put human rights back at the center of our foreign policy and reassert our moral leadership on the global stage. To lead, as Chris has so often heard me say, with the power of our example, not the example of our power. Chris and I served in the Foreign Relations Committee. We excoriated the abuses elsewhere in the world and called for action overseas. But human rights, in some ways, stood apart from the domestic struggle of civil rights and civil liberties and equal justice here at home. Today, we know that our efforts to defend human rights around the world are stronger because we recognize our own historic challenges as part of that same fight. Leading by example means taking action at home to renew and defend our own democracy, to advance equity and promote justice, to defend the sacred right to vote in free, fair, and secure elections. Leading by example means not pretending that our history has been perfect, but demonstrating how strong nations speak honestly about the past and uphold the truth and strive to improve. We make the best case for gender equality, racial justice and equity, religious freedom, the rights of the LGBTQ plus peoples and other marginalized communities around the world by practicing what we preach. First 10 minutes out of his office, I ended the Muslim ban, advancing racial equity through the federal government, overturning the ban on transgender individuals serving openly in the United States military, establishing the White House Gender Policy Council, demonstrating that our commitment to human rights begins at home, is among the most powerful and persuasive tools in our foreign policy kit. And as we defend human rights beyond our shores, we're more effective when we work together, allies and partners in our shared values. America as a nation is unique in all history, not because we're inherently better, because the basis upon which we're organized. Virtually every other nation is organized based on ethnicity, religion, geography, color. We're unique in all the world. We're based on one guiding principle. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have never lived up to it. We've never, until very recently, walked away from it. The arc has always bent closer and closer to justice and inclusion. The moment we stop, the moment we rest, is the moment that our influence diminishes. So we're re-engaging multilaterally and rallying the world to advance universal human rights and fundamental freedoms, to prove that democracies can still deliver in an age of fast-moving, cross-cutting challenges. We have rejoined the UN Human Rights Council, which we walked away from. The United States of America didn't want to be part. I mean, just yesterday, we won an election to a new 3-year term that begins in January in that committee. We had to fight to get back on it because the world wondered, do we mean it still? The United States of America, do we mean it? In December, the United States will host a virtual summit, a summit of democracies, to bring together world leaders to make concrete commitments to defend democratic values and push back against advancing authoritarianism. Not war, but important words. We can't return to a world where might is right and strong nations abuse weak or oppress individual rights with impunity. Nuremberg forced us to look closely at the evil of humankind and what we're capable of perpetrating. To see mass atrocities, crimes against humanity, do not happen by accident. They don't happen by accident. The result of choices made by individual human beings and world leaders. And sadly, when we look around the world today, we cannot say that the specter of atrocity is behind us. We see today the patterns, the choices playing out around the world, even as we speak. The oppression and use of forced labor of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, treatment of the Rohingya by the military junta in Burma, the rampant abuses, including the use of starvation and sexual violence to terrorize civilian populations in northern Ethiopia. Whenever we hear that kind of poisonous hatred, where we see our fellow human beings being dehumanized, Doesn't mean we go to war, but we must speak out. Silence, as my dad would remind me, silence is complicity. Silence is complicity. That's what Nuremberg said. Your silence is complicity. I've raised these issues personally with leaders around the world, our friends and adversaries alike, and I made it clear that no U.S. president should stand by when human rights are under attack and maintain their legitimacy. That's who we are as Americans. It's part of our DNA. We've fought, we've marched, we've sacrificed to ensure the rights are not reserved to just the wealthy or the powerful. They're God-given inheritance of every person on this planet by virtue of our shared humanity. As I said to a Supreme Court justice who I disagreed with in a hearing, we have a different form. You think I have my rights because the Constitution granted to me. I possess my rights because I was born. And I gave up some of my rights in a Constitution. That's the radical idea at the core of the founding of our nation. As I said, that all men and women are created equal. We really are endowed by a Creator with certain inalienable rights. And those rights don't flow from the power of the government. These rights exist for every individual, period. Period. And it's the job of government to protect them, to uphold them equally for all people. We've never, as I said, fully lived up to that animating American ideal, but we've never turned our backs on it. In all the years since our founding, that idea has been our nation's steady North Star, drawing us back on course. The constant struggle to live up to our highest democratic principles, to self-correct, has made us a beacon of hope for the rest of the world. It's also made us strong, resilient, innovative, dynamic. As I said, I'll repeat, I apologize, America is the only nation founded on an idea, the single most powerful idea in human history. It sparked our revolution. It helped ignite the wave of change around the world that successive generations have built on, expanding our understanding and extending protections to ever wider circle. We must never forget just how fragile the principle of universal human rights still is, how easily bruised, often sacrificed in human battles for power and personal enrichment. In an age of increasing misinformation and disinformation, we must not grow complacent in our defense of the democratic values that have been the firm foundation for an era of peace and prosperity unprecedented in human history. Attacks on truth are still the harbinger of tyranny. Nothing about our democracy is assured, as I'm sure you're all becoming to realize of late. Nothing about our freedom is guaranteed. We have to work for it. In those letters from Tom Dodd to his dear wife Grace, reflecting his service at Nuremberg, he wrote, "Sometimes a man knows his duty so clearly, so surely, he cannot hesitate, and he dare not refuse it." Tom Dodd lived a life with a clarity of purpose. He brought it to his service as a U.S. Senator, leading the floor fights with the Kennedys on civil rights legislation in the 60s, advocating for gun safety in a state that was a major gun manufacturer, legislation that was ahead of its time, fighting always for human rights and democracy against the forces of oppression and injustice. He passed that passion on to his children and to his son Chris. Chris carried forward his father's mantle in the United States Senate. He used it to fight for all American children and families, passing the first Child Care Act we've seen in this country since World War II, passing the Family and Medical Leave Act. Chris rallied against policies that militarize our relationships in Latin America and argued, instead recognize and invest in the people in our hemisphere. He spoke out when he saw the legacy of justice that his father had fought for in Nuremberg being wrapped in the excesses of a war on terror. And he helped to create this center, growing it over the years from an archival repository for the truth into a leading center for the study and promotion of human rights at home and abroad, into a widely respected academic institution, training the next generation of human rights defenders and passing the torch to those of you who will carry the fight on into the future and for the truth. So as we rededicate the Dodd Center for Human Rights to honor the legacies of both father and son, let's also dedicate it to the future of generations, to the students here in the audience today who discover and defend human rights as the passion and purpose of our life. So let us be dedicated to expanding our shared understanding that we can never fully realize the freedom we wish for ourselves without also helping ensure that liberty and justice for everyone. And let's dedicate to the unending fight to bring our own nation, our own world, closer to a future in which every human being is free to pursue the highest dreams and unleash their full potential. And for you students that are here, undergraduates at this great institution, there's no reason why you will not be doing what I'm doing as President of the United States, standing here speaking to audiences from now. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I was taught, came from very modest means, no Horatio Alger story, but very modest means, that you can be anything you set your mind to if you work at it. So many of you in this audience, especially in the second tier there, are the people that my grandchildren are going to be looking to. There's not a single reason why, we can't do this. Not a single reason. As I've told every world leader that I've gotten to know, and I've met many, many of them, it's never been a good bet to bet against the American people. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.